Om Shanti, good evening. Welcome to this session of Interview with the Raj Yogi. And tonight the topic is the power to cooperate with the self. This is part 2. So we explored this topic last session as well. As usual, we'll start with a reflection. Sometimes as we go through the day, it can feel like there's lots of laboring, battling, working, having to output so much energy for very little return, thinking a lot, planning a lot. The feeling that perhaps things are not cooperating with the self. How to win cooperation so that it feels more like a dance than a labor going through the day. It begins internally. Making the right decisions. The resources I use inside, my thoughts, my attitudes, my vision, my perceptions and perspectives. Are these aligned with the direction I want to go? If I want positive outcomes outside, to win that cooperation with the outer world, I have to check, am I creating positive thoughts inside? Do I have a pure attitude? Always it's from the inside out. Checking inside if I am cooperating with myself through my thoughts, feelings, attitudes. This is what wins outer cooperation. Om Shanti.
Shanti, good evening. So we continue tonight with part 2 and some things that came to mind during the reflection, especially I was speaking to someone today. She had a pretty, distressing incident that happened with her in the last month. And so I think many would find that there seems to be a power that's required to be able to do um, what we're talking about, and that sometimes even the thoughts are not powerful enough. So, what to do with that?
I think it's so important to educate ourselves on how things actually work, because I think what's so heartbreaking is that each of us is pouring a lot of energy into something, some endeavor, always with the vision of attaining peace and happiness in our lives. We all want the same outcome. So we're putting a lot of energy into what we believe is the path to peace and happiness. And we're always so surprised when we don't win that cooperation, when those outcomes don't happen. We say, but I did everything right. And why is the world not cooperating with me? And so it takes a certain humbling to sort of learn how things actually work. And am I putting my energy in the right direction? So I think that's sort of step one, is just learning how things actually work.
Perhaps it seems like that even there's timing that's required for that inner cooperation. And it was just interesting. There was a class that was being shared earlier today. It might not seem like it's a part of tonight's topic. We've covered it before, but it was about, well, we used the word endurance, but it was the power to tolerate. And it's all actually couched under, a bigger topic of maturity, which does feel like it requires a lot of understanding that is needed. And perhaps maybe this is why this is probably one of the most, I guess, penultimate powers, because there seems to be an accumulation that's required of other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For some reason, when I'm seeing the word cooperate today, I'm thinking of the word ally. I don't know why. We sort of we had we have an initiative going on, and we're actually piggybacking on an initiative that's happening in the USA, which is serving through the mind. And I was really touched. Every evening it's a different focus, and I was really touched by the focus on Sunday a couple of days ago. And it talked about this idea of feeling alone, as if I don't have any support, or no one's cooperating with me, or this kind of feeling I have to do everything alone, and or feeling alone. And of course, given this is a spiritual organization, it was talking about the fortune of winning God's cooperation. And the idea that, am I even surrounding myself by the best allies? Or have I got the cooperation of the best resources? And yes, that takes timing. We sort of have attached ourselves to things that really aren't cooperating with the benefit of the self. When we say cooperate with the self, to what end? Is it for self progress or to continue to do what I like to do? Or like what kind of cooperation are we looking for? To what end? And I think that's the first thing we have to kind of explore is cooperating with keeping my life the way it is, or cooperating with having my desires fulfilled, or is it cooperating with the self in terms of personal development or spiritual development? So, what are we trying to win cooperation towards? Because it can get very mixed up with desires, and nothing's cooperating with what I want to happen. And so, you know, this idea, and then we sort of feel forsaken, abandoned, disappointed, and things just aren't cooperating with me. I feel alone. So once I again kind of have some sort of basic understanding of where I'm trying to move the self, like cooperate with the self to what end? Where am I trying to move the self? Um, and that's where the word benevolent is so critical. When we talk about cooperation, it's towards a benevolent outcome, something beneficial. So I need to educate myself first on what exactly is beneficial for the self. I could be pouring my energy into things and think I'm cooperating with myself, but pouring it into things that actually are quite damaging to the self. So has that even first piece become clear of what is beneficial for the self and how can I cooperate or gather resources, surround myself with resources that will help me to reach that benevolent outcome or goal.
Sometimes it feels like as if you really can't really talk about the different powers, so to speak, or capacities in their own little isolation because, that we're just, it's just whatever is needed according to the time. But it does feel like, their timing's a part of it, but some letting go that seems to be needed, or perhaps maybe a sense of disinterest in operating in an old way because sometimes it feels like you can sense if someone or even ourselves, we don't feel like, if there is um, a feeling of knowing what I think is right. And it
Mm.
might not be necessarily accurate, but until you can really actually, I'm not sure what the word is, it's just disinterested in trying to operate in a way that never creates useful, meaningful outcomes internally, if you can even say it that way. I don't think one can really be open to being able to see another perspective.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we've explored over the week several powers and they are very interconnected or almost a chain reaction. And so the sort of, you use the word timing, but readiness, I think, yeah, sometimes we're just exhausted or tired or or beat up trying to do the same thing over and over. And so that might help us to be open um, to looking at something different or new, to letting go, but um, to cooperate with what we only really talk about these powers when we're looking at a change. This is all under power of transformation. So, is it clear to me where I need to direct my energy in order to help myself? What is helping the self? What is benefiting the self? And sometimes, we're very attached to old ways. We say, yes, I'm ready to change, but I'm not because I'm still so I just land up trying harder at old things and again get frustrated and think, but I am cooperating with myself. I am doing, I am trying really hard. But at what? What am I doing? Is it actually connected to where I want to go?
Do you feel there's a combination of that capacity to understand and some, I know that which is a part of what tonight's session is about, is you want to cooperate, but you don't have the capacity to cooperate. If there's, definitely a sense of enlightenment or illumination or some understanding about myself, but is that necessarily always enough?
You know, I think of that saying, take one step of courage and God will cooperate or respond with 100,000 fold or some multiplication thereof. Um, we just kind of want to get the thing off the ground. So, and then I think it will build momentum. The capacity will slowly keep coming, but I sort of have to get the thing off the ground. We always, there's the saying, that we are going to go from the worst to perfect, and it doesn't, there's a whole journey in between. So I kind of sense as I have to realize that, but at least to take that step, at least to be open. I know for me, myself personally, that for a very long time I was saying, okay, I really need to, I'm in so much angst. I really need to change. But there wasn't yet really that step. And the step of courage usually does involve letting go in some way. This is really the first step of cooperation with the self, is the courage to let go of what is familiar or even addictive, if you will. And then there will be a huge response. We sometimes say from God or from the universe, but basically from the law of karma, there will be a huge response in terms of opening doors, making it possible for me to keep having opportunities to increase capacity. But I always have to take that first step of courage.
It's just really interesting that this whole, it's often, I think this is where it came up with this topic too, because often we talked about last week, the power of cooperation. It's something that has to do with how I cooperate with others, which is true. But um, I think oftentimes because ego gets in the way, that's the first thing we think of is sort of looking on the outside versus the inside. And and I was thinking about a story that was shared in of how if someone doesn't have the capacity to change, is it very useful to try to force change in them? If you're, let's say, a senior teacher, and perhaps maybe the most merciful thing to do is to accommodate where they are at. Otherwise, if they can't even follow other recommendations, it would just make them feel even worse.
Yeah, what is sort of often shared in that scenario is that there will be no violence. I mean, we don't ever feel violence forcing anyone to do anything, but always a sense of good wishes, good wishes, good wishes. So when that is something I'm trying to do with myself, very often the first letting go, and this is perhaps the most difficult form of cooperation, that first step is to let go of an old sense of self, very limited old sense of self. That is the first sort of step of cooperation, having a good wish for the self. Our sense of self is very much based on the past. And so we just keep creating the same stuff because our sense of self is based on old stuff. To have a different sense of self, I compare it to healing actually, is really a huge part of cooperating with the self. So, and that requires letting go of an old. It's very easy to say and even easy to think, but it's really quite a huge step to move along with a completely different sense of self. So that's a good wish for the self, So what a senior will be doing in that situation is their vision on that soul will be very elevated on behalf of if that soul cannot do it for themselves. So this is, can I do that for myself? Can I let go of an old way of seeing myself and see myself in a very elevated way? I heard this talk today, and so much of it is staying in my mind. It was very powerful. The speaker is very powerful. He's quite well known, and he was asked what advice he would give to young men of a particular ethnicity and also young women. It didn't matter. It applies to anybody. And I was sitting there. He was very thoughtful. He would always pause before he answered. And I'd use that time of a pause to try and discern what he was going to say. And it was really interesting, actually. I wouldn't say he formally is in the study, but his answers were so aligned and very powerful. And what he was saying, especially in this case towards young women, was to have a very different vision on themselves. As he said, to not go through a third party. But then he added, I am a religious man, so you can look at yourself the way the Lord might, but that's it. But have a very different vision on yourself, not the one that you have perhaps been given over and over by society or customs. It's an easy thing to say, and we know it's right, but it is really a challenge to cooperate, to have that first step of cooperation, to see the self in a very different, not that limited or old way.
I feel that this is relevant because there's one thing to talk about something and then the actual capacity to enact the capacity. Which sounds kind of redundant. You need the power to be able to use the power, I suppose you can say. And things are fine until you're at that moment when there's emotions or whatever the case is. Timing, I'm sure, is one of them. Time, they have that famous phrase, time heals things, or perhaps maybe it gives some space. But it sounds like we have talked about this before. Where does the power of silence, how does that help in terms of um, this capacity to cooperate and not just be some sort of disconnected topic that we're bringing into this aspect of power of cooperation?
It's really interesting in this study because we talk about this vision of what I will become at the end of this journey of transformation. We could call it highest potential or whatever term is meaningful, but really, attaining this very elevated, spiritually developed sense of self. And so we have that idea in front of us, and then we also are aware of where we're starting from. And then we kind of put in the middle of it, you're going to have to get there through, we say shanti, through peace or through silence. And, it's a bit like, I always compare it to, you've got this animal, this thing called a butterfly, and it goes through different stages. It's always a butterfly, but at one point we call it a caterpillar. And we know that it is impossible to go from caterpillar to butterfly. Something's got to happen in the middle. And we can't just sort of stick wings on a caterpillar and say, hey, we've got a butterfly. Something has to happen. But we know that it's destined that it will become that butterfly. And we know that in between there's a stage called a cocoon, which is very similar to going into some kind of silence or introversion. And what it is it's silence is the space that is not here or here. And that's a really difficult we're always either here or here. We're in the past or the future. But we don't have that transitional sort of space, which is outside of both, but somewhere solid that we can stand. And that's what silence or a cocoon many people try to simulate that. They go on vacation or they go on a retreat or they go to a spa, but it's not really outside because it's not a physical place we're trying to go to. It's a completely different paradigm or headspace we need to go into. So, silence, I always think of as free from the past, definitely free from what is temporal or temporary. So, going into very big picture, very eternal experiences, really outside of both of these kinds of forms or stages. Um, and it requires a certain understanding in the mind. But yeah, it's critical. It's the transition zone between the two.
So it feels like it's again back to that there seems to be a lot of other things that need to be in place before there can really be cooperation.
Yeah, it's a funny thing if we're thinking of. I mean, silence too is so much letting go to get into that silence. I mean, this sounds like a very delicate thing to say, but there's so much hardship and difficulty in the world, and is there a gift to that hardship? In the sense that often we seem to have our back up against the wall or go into quite a bit of pain in order to let go. And that can be the readiness or the timing or the. I'm amazed how much, if you want to talk about endurance or tolerance, I'm amazed how much pain souls can tolerate before they will let go. It's remarkable. Of course, it's lack of understanding that the thing I'm holding on to is the cause of the pain, but there is a gift there in being pushed into a lot of sorrow, and then it gets to a point where it's like, I can't do this anymore. And that's, I think, when we're ready to open up to new understandings, and those new understandings will help me to reach that silence where realizations can happen.
So it's interesting that it feels like there needs to be some freedom to maybe see clearly,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe that there's a lot that happens when you feel free, or maybe you might not even be able to articulate that's what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think definitely. It's funny when people are. They always say, when sometimes I'm able to open up to a complete stranger much more than I can because I feel free from all of the old structures and dynamics, and I have a little bit of freedom so I can have those. And even inventors would often say they'd have their aha moments when they were free from trying to grapple with the problem directly. So it's a really how to methodically achieve that state where I am free from the old, from the details, so that I can, something new from within can emerge.
Some may have taken the course before, but we often share about how the mind, how our thinking functions. It functions in a cyclical way. And so to be able to have a different pattern of thinking, I think many struggle with that. You just can't stop thinking about something. And so what do? We really just often just resort to suppressing things. And I think some try to even replace how they think. So when it comes to being able to cooperate with myself, you were sharing about there needs to be some, at least some understanding. Does it have to be at that level where, like, what level of understanding is required? Because it can just seem like it's just chasing the thoughts away and not really actually feeling like you're really free from a different pattern of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's when, the idea that there's these different powers and how they kind of one moves to the next. It all starts with some form of disinterest, whether it's inspired by a little discomfort or a lot of pain, but some form of disinterest. Really genuine, authentically open to a change with the self, not anything outside, but a change within the self. And of course, I'm Barring on the example of Brahma Baba, it's very easy. His life makes it very easy to see clearly how this works. And it started with him wanting a change within himself, having that disinterest, nothing external, wanting a change within himself. And that sort of makes us open to letting go of the old, or open, moving into that retreat, maybe not this pure silence, but some form of introversion happening. And in that, I'm able to access different experiences, and those different experiences give me clarity and more understanding and more honesty. And that's when I'm able to make some choices that actually will move me in a new direction, that cooperation. So his life really describes to us how these pieces don't work in isolation, they work together. Because, yes, you can't, all it ends up being is a lot of violence and guilt. You should do this to help yourself. I don't know how many times we've felt that, where we're watching someone sort of self destruct, and from our very objective position, we can see what they need to do. And back to the seniors, that they have that vision and good wishes, because they know if you tell someone that directly at that time, it can actually backfire, can lead to a lot of guilt or irritation or anger, because often souls know that's what they need to do, but there's not the capacity or understanding. So how the pieces fit together so that I actually can do something beneficial for the self. And yes, it does have to start with that readiness, that disinterest.
So just going back to when you were sharing about, just having even good wishes for oneself. Could it also be that, like I can't feel anything different right now. So it's kind of odd in a way. I mean, there's still a little part of you watching you, but
Mm-hmm.
not being able to let go. Sort of just letting go of not being able to let go at that moment, if that's even possible. But I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's called patience, that I'm aware of what I probably would be beneficial for the self, but I'm not capable of doing it now. Um, and to be at peace with that moment, is sort of providing some patience, if you will, with the self. It's very understanding. We don't want violence. Violence will never create cooperation with the self. But being very aware, and I think that there's so much about patience, faith in the self, trust in the self. These are really important qualities that sort of bolster, or support cooperating with the self. There are things I know I need to do. I'm going to have to be very, very honest. Sometimes in fitness class, um, souls are given an exercise for a certain period of time or a certain level of difficulty, and they are told, they're given permission. After seeing it, it's like, okay, so perhaps you need to take a break right now, or you need to do this at a different progression. That's fine, but you need to be honest with yourself. Am I taking a break because I'm lazy? Or am I taking a break because I really need one? So there's a lot of honesty required in this. Um, but just that sensitivity. I don't want to be violent. I want to be firm and clear and clean and honest with the self, but not violent. And that again is all part of these different powers, you know. And I think they sort of spiral upwards as I keep going. I get better and better. But I have to start somewhere. When I'm ready, I have to take some step. And definitely when I look at the beginning of my spiritual journey, and probably still now, it's hopefully going to continue. I'll look back and say, oh my goodness, it was so Neanderthal. But at that moment, that felt like a huge step. that's what I was capable of at that moment. And then there's some return, and then it just keeps moving forward. But we take the step we can at that moment, knowing it's really lovely. We get a roadmap in advance. That's really helpful. Usually, when we are trying to travel to a destination, we kind of know the route ahead of time. And then we just, okay, I go to this city first, and then I go to that city, and then, so, but we know what the plan is, and we are given the plan ahead. We're told what to expect along the way. This is great fortune. Cooperation is to remember all of that as I'm moving along, so that, okay, as you go here, you're going to feel more resistance. And then over here, you're going to have these kinds of thoughts. That's really helpful, so that I don't jump ship. I keep moving along with that understanding. So that means there's going to be less violence.
So it's interesting because when we're talking about just how to use that power to cooperate, and there seems to be a lot of even just subtle elements of what I'm feeling, but to even be able to feel, as you were sharing about what's needed according to the time, but it feels like even what the meaning and experience of what cooperation is, like any of the other capacities, the feeling of it can shift through time as you continue to, I suppose, the word progress or mature in the study.
Yeah. Um, when I look at the senior students, their level of discipline is so high, but the feeling of easiness is so high as well. Whereas when we first start, just a little bit of discipline makes us tense. We heard that the other day, that when you sit in meditation, you shouldn't look like you're tense. And so I think that we work with the sensitivities we have at any given moment along the way. And we're always wanting to maintain this cooperation with the self, of course, is to honor these disciplines of care, spiritual care. They are disciplines. They are going to be different from what we've been doing before. Um, I do what I can at that moment, knowing it's always going to progress. But it's actually going to, as I become more disciplined, if I'm doing everything accurately, it actually becomes easier, which seems odd, I know, because we're advancing and yet it's becoming easier. Whereas when we're just very starting, it just seems so challenging. So again, we're accumulating as we're going along, so that uh, doing more advanced, being more advanced is actually, there's more easiness in it. When I'm thinking of one of the dadas, Chandrahas, one of the senior students who has passed away. I remember one year being in Madhuban, and every night we would have 2 hours of meditation in the evening. It was a very beautiful time in Madhuban. And there wasn't a lot of us there. And he would come in, I think, for the last half hour to guide the meditation, simply by sitting at the front of the room, being in a meditative state and sharing that through his vision, his drishti. And on that, it was extremely powerful. And it's so easy to stay focused. And you just knew the soul was at such a high stage. But one of the things that would always come through my mind is the contrast of when, as young ones, we sit to conduct and we're like, I am now a powerful yogi. And we look like we're drilling someone with our eyes or something. And he looked so easy up there at the front of the room. Like he was just so easy, so light, so natural. And yet I knew it was so powerful. I was experiencing something so powerful. And how sort of get into this momentum of cooperating with the self, able in a very natural way to have these disciplines of self-care in one's life. So natural. And yet you could see the level of power that it created, how advanced the soul was. So that's where it's so nice to see that possible. But we start wherever we are, and we stay very honest, and very careful, full of care, and it will continue to gain momentum.
I think in a way you kind of like addressed the last question I was going to ask. Does it become more natural
Mm-hmm.
without really having to, as you were saying, feel like a quite primitive as I try to practice?
I mean, it's kind of a bit of a funny thing to say that we didn't even have to talk about having to become more natural in cooperating with the self. You would think that cooperating yourself would just be a natural way of being, but we became the exact opposite. We did things which we are doing things that do not cooperate with our own well-being, with our own benefit, and therefore not the benefit of others. And sometimes the word, it's a very strong word, the word sin is used. But the biggest crime or sin, of course, is to forget the self, specifically the greatness of the self as a child of God. That, of course, is the first sin, and then all others come as a result of that. So we say that the highest form of blessing or cooperation is to remember I am a child of God, and that should become natural. Really simple, but it's amazing. Again, the past keeps pulling us into old ways of thinking about ourselves, which is really forgetting ourselves. So, but it should be natural that we cooperate with ourselves. The moment I experience myself to be a child of God, it changes everything, my vision, my thoughts, my attitudes, my activity. Very naturally change. So we want to make that, we call it our natural nature, very automatic, that I experience who I really am. I am elevated soul. I am child of God. So that would be cooperation with the self.
Feels like I think they're all big topics, but this one feels like there's so many elements we could have
Mm-hmm.
definitely shared about. And one of them was about contentment and, really deepening what is the part of soul consciousness in this whole thing, because you can sort of miss the boat and not realize you're trying to attain that. So we'll see if we have a third part. It might be too much. So I guess we should probably close off
We
with
always welcome feedback.
yeah, we do.
So
Mhm. So I'll just close off with a little reflection right now.
it has been said by many thinkers at this time, looking at all the distress and sorrow in the world, that what's needed, the only thing needed, is love. And specifically underlining self love. Because only when there is love is there cooperation. If there's love for the self, there would be cooperation with the self. We think the word love is the most important part of that phrase, but it's actually self. To recognize the self, to experience my true self, automatically will awaken feelings of love, regard, value for the self, cooperation. The moment I recognize myself, that I am this exquisite spiritual being, endowed with intrinsic goodness, truly, really, genuinely a child of the Supreme Soul. If I experience that, there would be such feelings of value for the self. an appreciation of the self, love, and very naturally, I would embrace disciplines that uplift the self. Letting go of old ways, really lies and illusions about the self, and opening up to the truth, an eternal sense of self. This is where cooperation begins. Om Shanti.
Shanti. Perhaps maybe it just brings up certain little subtopics which are really important. But again, back to the how in terms of Raja Yoga. So I'll pass it back to Judy now to let us know about upcoming sessions.
Okay.
Thank you for joining Om Shanti.
We always welcome your feedback. Definitely can send a note by email. So, trying to remember what's coming up. We continue to have drop-in meditation Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. And we are almost into March. And March, we have a wonderful soul Shivratri that inspires some of the programming you're going to see. So I know there's going to be a program on, I believe, Sunday, March 7th. This will be in Hindi, and I believe it's 4 to 5:30 p.m., but that information will be posted really soon. So stay tuned for that. And then for in English, this every Sunday in March during the drop-in meditation, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., we are going to be transmitting or sharing very beautiful commentaries that have been prepared that explore the different specialities of God. So, really helping us to have a clear experience of that being, because that being is a great ally when it comes to cooperating with the self. So that will be 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. on the Sundays in March. Again, we'll be posting and sending out all this information, but I know that the days are flying by. Inner fitness will continue Saturdays 2 to 3, self-care, which is facilitated by our young adults, Saturdays from 4 to 5. Hindi drop-in meditation is Thursday 6 to 7, I believe. There's a lot going on, so I would recommend to visit our website. And thank you for joining this evening. Om Shanti.